So thank you for being here. And we're here to celebrate Mumtaz Mustafa and Laura Klinstra's book, Gather in Grays, talk about the varied inspirations that they have had from around the world. Mumtaz is a family friend. I've known her all my life. And she works at HarperCollins in New York. She's been doing that for a long time. She's a creative director. And she's actually in the business of creating book covers, creating books, doing the designs of books. Primarily, Mumtaz, it's to do with food, art, living. Is that correct?
I work in the food and art space, but also fiction and non-fiction. I've been at the same job for 25 years, so pretty much done every genre of book that exists.
Every genre, which I remember her now deceased aunt Benazir Bhutto. You did Daughter of the East, I think her other book.
Reconciliation.
Reconciliation. She did the first cover for the American edition. It was a beautiful book cover, I still remember. And starting from there, now she has her own cookbook with Laura. So tell us a little bit about life as a creative director in New York in the publishing world, and how that then, because from what I understand, your professional life and Laura's, both of them have been in the world of designing books and been creative directors, both of them at HarperCollins, and I think Laura now has moved to Michigan, correct? So taking your professional life and then your passion, which is cooking and food and learning about food from various parts of the world, visiting those places, living there, learning the recipes firsthand from the real sources. How these two things came together to create this beautiful book?
Well, I mean, it's interesting if we go back to just us being family friends. I'm not going to go too into this. We grew up around food. I think you did, I did. My mother loved to gather all her friends and entertain. I would love to cook with her. I learned a lot from her. When I was applying to college, basically, I applied to art school and I also applied to liberal arts. And I got into Tufts, which is where you went, and I got into RISD, and I ended up going to art school. But my degree project was a restaurant, and I always said, well, if I don't get an A in design, I know I can get my professors to give me an A for the food. So I fed them and then showed them the design of the restaurant. And I also always wanted to study English, which is where I wanted to go to Tufts. So when I was applying for jobs, HarperCollins was like the perfect fit because I was surrounded by books, by authors, and I also got to be creative at the same time. So that's where this journey began. I remember my first cookbook that I ever designed the cover for, as random as it is, was called the BLT Sandwich Cookbook. And I just kept looking at BLT sandwiches, and at the time I didn't even know what it was. I was like 21 years old, and I'm like, I don't know what a BLT is, but and then here I am. I now oversee our cookbook imprint, our lifestyle imprint, and I also do some fiction and non-fiction. But my passion lies in the food space. Laura and I met at HarperCollins. She was my boss, which is interesting. Laura was like this, typical Michigan Midwesterner who grew up having tater tot casseroles, and she hadn't ever tried anything that was with any spice. She met me. We hosted an international potluck, and I fed her biryani, and she loved it. And I made these aloo keema cutlets, and she calls them potato puffs, which are in the book because that's one of her favorite recipes. And that's how we actually began to host and gather and get together, get our friends together. It was, everyone in the office loved us because we would, feed them. And that's was our love language. And who doesn't like food, I guess. So that's how this whole kind of journey began. And then during COVID, we were all feeling quite isolated in our little pods. She was in Michigan, I was in New York. And we spoke on the phone and we said, everyone's talking about building these walls and all of this. Let's try and build a bigger table. Let's put together a proposal. We're designing everyone else's cookbooks. We're doing everything for other authors. Let's do it for ourselves. I'm like, well, if that means that we can hang out and we're both workaholics, let's do it. So I would go to Michigan because she has a gorgeous kitchen. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in New York with limited sunlight. So we just started, we didn't know what we were doing. We just started taking photos. And we learned, we just started to, I learned, styling, photography. We did everything in natural light. And we said, let's do something that's all-inclusive, not just a book about, Midwestern food or Pakistani food or, she's originally Dutch. So we said, let's make this like our top of the pops from around the world that we've loved and we've traveled and we've tried. And this is what this became, without trying to appropriate anything at all. It was just our little kind of, we love these dishes and we're going to try and create them. So that's how Gather and Grace came about.
But when you entertain at home, because we
Yes.
were talking about this, when you entertain at home, I mean, not in an apartment in New York, let's say, if you were entertaining in Michigan or let's say Pakistan or wherever, would you create, because if you look at the book is divided into various themes. I'm going to come back to this, but there's Ethiopian, there's South American, there's Pakistani street food, there's Belgian, so it's all divided into various sections. There's a wonderful section on how to create a cheese board, which I think we need to work on in Lahore because they're not very good, and various other things. So is it designed so that people can take a set of things, their set of recipes, and use them together as one set? Because it seems like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole idea. When we launched this book in New York last year, a lot of my friends were like, they began to host these Gather and Grace potluck parties, which I loved. I loved the idea that somebody picked one thing from each section. It was a surprise, and then they put it all together. So you can absolutely mix and match things here. You can do, it can work in any way, form. And we've given a lot of different, like if you don't want to make homemade hummus, you can buy it from the store. You don't want to make, we've given a lot of options, but yeah, it's all about putting things together. And I actually, even in my apartment, like I've hosted crazy parties. I've had, with all kinds of food and from everywhere, and it's, yeah. So basically, you can use this book how you like. It's kind of a journey, like it's and how it was for us too. So. Yeah.
So one thing that I think that should be pointed out about this book and their culinary journey, the two authors, is that Mumtaz comes very much from Pakistan. She's very used to spice. She's very used to fragrant food. She's used to food with color and a lot of savory things, spicy things with a lot of flavor. And Laura has a Dutch American background, and she's really a baker. She's a brilliant baker, so she understands bread. She understands baking. The very nice thing about this book is that her sort of dexterity with carbs and with bread making and baking, and then that mixed with your understanding of, let's say, global cuisine and spice and sweetness and sourness and all of those flavor profiles, when they came together, I think you guys have, when you read the recipes actually, they're easy, but some recipes, which, I mean, there's a couple of things that one knows, like Pakistani things and maybe things like the blinis with the salmon and the sauce that goes with it and other things like that. I just felt that there's simple recipes, but there's a sense of the authors definitely knowing both sides, the carb side as well as the protein side, and how spice is mixed with something that's like a bread related item. And of course, when you move on to the desserts, I think it's mostly Laura, right?
Absolutely. If I was to bake a cake, it would fall flat. I don't think I could ever make... so all the desserts are Laura. Every sweet item is Laura, including the jalebis, which was pretty epic because she didn't even know what a jalebi looked like. So, I sat with her and we did it for days and days, and she, really loved it. Naan katai is something, and it's interesting that that actually has a Dutch there was a Dutch settler that came in, and that's how the cookie began, like it started its journey. And we learned a lot through our research in this book, how food, like kind of, it travels and it becomes something else. And so she did all the desserts, everything that was bread related, cracker related, sweet related, and I did all the savory. And we came into this with our, our individual expertises, and we were able, and most cookbooks are either heavy on dessert or heavy on savory, and we wanted this to be equal. So we wanted to offer both aspects and have people have the option of, whatever they're interested in.
I was also interested in talking about what you were saying to me, that you went and spent time in Morocco to learn the Moroccan dishes. You went to,
To Portugal.
Portugal to learn a lot of the Portuguese recipes. So talk a little bit about how that helped you, because you traveled, you stayed there for months, you learned the recipes firsthand. You obviously, knew what they tasted like right at the source, and then you incorporated them into this wonderful tome.
Yeah, we all kind of, when we go and spend time with the locals and we kind of in different places, that's when you really experience the people and the food and the feeling. And that's, even when I wasn't planning this book, I remember whether it was in Florence, I just went to any class that was available that was food related. That was my first class ever. It was in Florence, I remember. And I spent everyone else was shopping or, going to museums and such, and I just met these interesting people, and I cooked all day, and I loved it so much that I said, no matter where I go, I want to take a class. After COVID, I had the opportunity to do that because we became full-time remote. Before that, so you could spend that extra. It wasn't just a week. I could spend, in Portugal, it was a month and a half, Morocco, we did 2 weeks. So then I feel when you're cooking with the locals, you really understand it. You see how they really eat and not the touristy version of it. In Spain also, there was a lot of, I would go in and speak to whether it was a grandmother cooking, making something, or, asking for the recipe. And some people were very forthright. They would give it to you forthcoming, others not so much. But yeah, I tried. I was relentless about it. So like I said, we're not appropriating it. We tried to figure out a way to recreate it in our kitchen, and that's what we wanted for everyone else that would buy our book.
How long did the process of creating this book take from this very time when you, I know how it started. It started by you, the two of you cooking at home, just with 4 friends, and then COVID happened, and then you went to Michigan, correct?
Back and forth.
Back and forth.
I would go one weekend and we'd shoot like 4 boards and we'd be dead. We'd wake up at 4 in the morning. It was, we would race against time. We had to catch the light. Everything was natural light. And first we had to build out the board, the huge board, shoot that, and then shoot the individual dishes. And often it doesn't last long and you have to redo it. And we would, by the end of it, we wanted to kill each other and ourselves, because we were like, oh God, it was such a labor of love. We were not thinking about it in any other way. And while we'd be working all night doing our freelance work or doing our job work, in the day we'd be either prepping for the next day's shoot or shooting. So we did the entire thing. It was a year and a half, writing it, shooting it, planning it, creating the proposal, pitching it, and all of it.
So the interesting thing about this book is that because they're both from the world of publishing, usually, you were telling me with HarperCollins, you need to have at least 200,000 followers on Instagram. Anybody who's interested in publishing a book, internationally. And if you don't have that many followers, they don't even look at you, right?
It's evolved. I think initially, when I first started, 20 plus years ago, as I age myself, there was no concept of obviously social media or any of that, but they built out brands from, people would have blogs, but that was it. Now it's all about TikTok and how many followers, below 200,000 is not entertained at HarperCollins at all.
So because of that number and because you didn't have those followers at that time, the interesting thing about this book is that each and every aspect of it they did themselves. Whether, like she's saying, the photography, the book design, well, that was easy because you design books, and then putting it together, the formation of the different chapters. A lot of it was already formed by you before you found the publisher, correct?
No, before we had a proposal and we had a rough idea.
Rough idea.
We had to have a book cover shot. So we did 3 different things and they chose, but everything else we would literally again race against time. For we submitted everything 5 weeks before it went to print. So it was literally we were,
But how is it different to, let's say, if you were to go to a big publishing house and because then they would find the photographer for you and pay for it, and they would give you it would be the process I'm just trying to explain to people the process of how this book was born and how let's say from a larger publishing house, how a book is created, because you've been involved in the one that you did yourself,
Right.
but you're involved every single day of your professional life in creating books for people that have signed up with your, with HarperCollins.
Absolutely. And that process begins with, they submit the proposal and they have some visuals, some ideas. The author usually pays for the photography, which is like usually like $30,000 to $40,000 per
My
book.
God.
So it's pretty significant, for us. We were like, we better learn how to do it ourselves. And then we'll approve it. I'll usually, present a couple of different photographers to the publisher. They'll approve it, make sure the look and feel is good. And then I'm present usually via Zoom or physically if I'm able to, if it's within New York, during the shoot, just to make sure that at least we have our cover shots. And then, I don't get too deep into the process shots, but, the main images and the cover shots. It's designed in-house. We have an interior design team. So they do all the interior designs for our 4-color books. My team does the cover design. And that's how that whole thing begins. And then we, it goes through passes and edits and all of that. And then we, send it out to people for blurbs. And then the whole marketing team comes in, and then they market it and try and get, shows or magazines and all of that.
Why is this books, because now books have become so specific, how is this book so varied? I mean, if you go through it, you'll see all kinds of different cuisines, and also things like that you can have a tea time or coffee time or, just desserts. I mean, I was amazed to see, come back to the Ethiopian section. I don't know how you got into Ethiopian food, for example.
We wanted to do, we couldn't do everything. The idea was that if this worked and we could keep doing it, but we wanted to represent something from some part of the world. So we wanted to cover roughly, and hence Ethiopian food also. And that was an interesting one. But I find the food quite similar to our food in terms of spice.
Spicy.
And then that, the bread piece of it, that Laura had to create this starter. We named it Alfred. It just kept, growing, and we had to figure out a way to do that. It was not easy, but we learned, and it was really fun. But we wanted to, I guess, have something from every part of the region, and food that we tried, and food that we had enjoyed, and that we were comfortable also trying to recreate in some way.
Talk a little bit about the Pakistani section, because it's Pakistani street food. It's not dishes, It's just street food that you can basically make into small bites. You can serve them at a drinks party. You can have them with friends. It's a very convivial kind of a menu that everyone can share. But like hors d'oeuvres, really.
Right. I mean, that's the thing, I feel for everyone here, it's stuff they see all the time and it doesn't feel, exciting as much. But yeah, I mean, they're just things that I really crave there, and I can't find good versions of. For me, I'm a huge chaat person, and I'm obsessed with chaat, and there's no place in New York.
Really?
I mean, any place that there is, it's really not good. So just creating that again, making that. So it was like my favorites. The bun kebab, there's pakoras, there's paratha roll, based on the red apple in Karachi. The foods that I would really, really crave are the ones that are part of the Karachi thing. Also things that were nostalgic to me, that reminded me of my grandmother, reminded me of moments. Chikki is even just the peanut brittle, it's something I used to save money and when I was in school and get her 4 chikkis from my school because she loved them. So I'm like, I have to include that and she used to just appreciate the fact that this kid is spending her school food money on my chikkis. So each thing has a story, each thing kind of has some purpose behind it in terms of when we were putting together our menus in this book.
What about, let's move back right to the beginning of your life when, I know for a fact that your mother, Nargis Mustafa, is a brilliant cook, and she actually had an incredible condiment that she started in Islamabad in the 1990s called Chili Magic, which was raw red chilies. I mean, I remember coming to your house in Islamabad, to your farmhouse, and there was a line of village women sitting on the floor, sort of slicing raw red chilies, slicing garlic. and she was bringing in the olive oil, and this is the most unbelievable chili condiment I've ever had in my life. And I remember her also serving it with roast chicken and a stuffing. Then you could have it with dal chawal. You could have it with, she put it in a pasta, and it's from Italian food to French style roast chicken to desi khana. That one condiment, it's kind of like this book. That one condiment was so varied. So I just want you to tell the audience a little bit about growing up in a house where food was so important, and coming from such a creative house, especially with your mother and her family, how that influenced you and what that was like.
Yeah, so the chili magic, and to your point, I think she named it quite aptly because it was magical. It really could go with any kind of dish, but it also brings back a funny story where at the time, like my mother is very creative. She was an interior designer. Our mothers worked together and created the most beautiful pieces of furniture and spaces. But I know that at the end we would always have food, and she decided to have this chili magic where she fermented all these chilies, and to your point, we'd wake up and everyone's eyes would be red, you know. And then she had these labels that she had made that she was not happy with at all. They were like 1,000 or 5,000 labels. And I remember saying, hey, can I go out and meet my friends? She's like, sure, but before that, I'm not happy. They're too white. Here's some tea bags. Sit here and stain each and every label. And I was like, you're kidding. She's like, nope, I'm not kidding. And you know she wasn't kidding.
No.
So I did, you know, and my friends, in fact, my friend Saharia is smiling because she remembers this. And my hands were, I think, tea stained for months as I did. But she took everything like she was a perfectionist. And you know, we always say we become our mothers in some way.
Yeah.
And at the time I thought she was neurotic, but now I kind of get it. And I think, you know, even with this, like the book, so many things in this book I've asked her, oh, what do you think of this? You know, she got a 2-year degree at the French Culinary Institute in Texas. So she's very into, you know, French cuisine and any other. I learned all the mother sauces from her, like anything and everything I would have. She can literally make anything be the most delicious thing in the world. And she has said to me lately, the last 2-3 times I've gone to see her in Texas, she's like, Mumtaz, you're becoming a better cook than I am. And that is huge for her to say. Whether she's just saying it to make me feel good, I'll take it. But yeah, she's absolutely one of my biggest influences with food and design, I think.
How do you find the time to cook such wonderful dishes and create these things, having a busy life in New York? Because in New York, everybody eats out. Hardly anybody cooks at home. And you're doing the polar opposite, because we were discussing this earlier on the phone, that, you know, you cook frequently.
I do.
And how does that work? Because it's so much easier to just go out and buy something or try something.
You know, it's very therapeutic for me. And I've just become that person within my friends and all that has, you know, cooks, and I enjoy it, and truly it's my love language. I just think that it brings, like my sister hates to cook. And she's like, I'm like, you know, why don't you just like, she complains that, oh God, I don't know what to make. I'm like, just make dal or whatever. She's like, God, I just can't be bothered and I don't want to do. And I'm like, but just, you know, she's like, I don't enjoy it one bit. And she grew up in the same house as I did. So it just, I think, you know, depends on how she just does not enjoy it. And for me, when I stare at my desk all day long, all the time, whether I'm, you know, whatever projects I'm working on. So for me to get away from the desk and go to the kitchen is just therapy. I just, yeah, and so that's really, and I never, for this book, the most difficult thing was like doing, coming up with actual ingredients and recipes, because for me it's much more andaza, you know?
Yeah.
That's why I can't ever bake. So,
That's
yeah.
interesting, because baking is very scientific.
Yes.
And you can't do that. But this is by, you know, I guess you know it yourself. How many of these recipes have been tried and tested? All of them?
At least once.
At least
yes,
once.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And a lot, like the khao for instance, that is something, again, one of my favorite dishes. And there's the Memoni khao, there's the Burmese khao, there's so many versions. So for that particular one, I think I've probably made it like at least 50 times, just to get it the way I like it. And that's something that I've hosted a lot. Like, it's something my friends love, so, you know, I love to make
what's
it.
your khao sui secret? A lot of people like khao sui here, I'm sure. Yeah. So tell us about your khao sui secret. Which type of khao sui is it?
So it's a combination of the memoni and the thing. It basically, so I have the meat separate. And in fact, my momani here, she's Bori. And she also has her version, the Borik Houseway. So this is like literally a combination of my chachi, my mamani, my mother, and all that. So the proteins are separate. I even came up with the tofu version. I have a bunch of vegetarian friends in New York. And so that's the very spicy kind of piece of it. And then the curry is separate and all the condiments are separate. My mother makes it the Rizwan Bake style, which is like the chicken and it's all together in one.
He actually came to our house last week and made it for us.
No way, how funny, because that was where she got her recipe.
Yeah. And that's the Burmese style.
The Burmese, absolutely.
Yeah, that's got quite a bit of oil. It's heavier.
Yes,
and it's more cooked.
And it's funny, my mother hosted a little book party for me like a few months ago in Texas, and she invited all her friends, and she was most excited. And she my issue is whenever I'm hosting, I'm like, oh God, there'll never be enough food. And even though there's like 10 dishes, there'll never be enough. So I said, now this is a test for both of us. We're going to make one dish, and it's just going to be khao. She looked horrified. She's like, well, what if it doesn't work and it's not good? I'm like, it'll have to work. So we just did the one khao, and we did the 3 proteins, and she kept going to check to make sure that it was going to work. And she once or twice I caught her trying to put things that she wasn't meant to put in it. But in the end, it was a combination of both of our thing, and it worked out and it finished. So we were really excited, and I said, see, we don't have to be insane. We can make one thing and do it really well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So being in publishing, I'm just interested to know from when you started to where you've gotten in terms of the world of communication and technology. The world has become digital, and you've published an actual physical book. So what happens from here? And it's been now 8 months. I think it was published in April last year. I know that you guys went on a publicity tour. They came on Good Morning America. You did your P-Day recipe for Good Morning America, which is one of the most watched segments in the US, and that was quite something. And then I was also seeing all the other links to, you went on other television shows. So you've been promoting the book quite a bit, and the book has been selling, physically selling as a book. And it's a heavy book. It's not a...
it's 300, it weighs 3 pounds, which is a lot when you're bringing the book from America and you have limited luggage. And it's 300 pages. We had to cut, we had an additional 4 sections that we had to cut. So, it's a very, what was your question?
No, I was about going to, you talk and then...
I'm sorry.
My question was that this is a physical book. So, and you've been on television shows and it's been selling and you were telling me that you went to a bookstore here and you saw it there.
Yeah.
Just last week, just 3 days ago.
I saw it in January in Karachi.
Yeah, in Karachi. Just, earlier last month. So my question is that wasn't there pressure to do kind of a soft version of it for people who are like to put it up on the web, or to do something for television, or to do something for YouTube? I mean, how have you worked out the digital side? Because if you want these recipes and you want them online, can you buy the book online? Can you put it in your Kindle? Can you do things like that? Because it's difficult to keep this book and carry it around with you. And more people are going the digital route now and not publishing at all. And also another corollary to my question is that have you been asked, or are there any plans of trying to do a YouTube cooking show with both of you, or are you moving towards digital in any way?
So I think one of our biggest, in terms of your immediate question, there is an ebook version available, our publisher, so you can buy, this is available anywhere and everywhere, Amazon. You can order it in Dubai, you can order it in London, you can order it obviously in New York. There are digital, the ebook version is there with all the color photography and all of that. And of course there's a physical book, and with the physical book we wanted to kind of create it so it could almost feel like a coffee table book, which is why it's so heavy and highly designed. But in terms of, we're both very camera shy. We did talk a lot, there was a lot, even when we started doing our TV segments and cooking on TV, for us, we weren't as nervous of actually cooking the food, but we were more nervous about just being on TV, just taking videos or whatever. But we've gotten more comfortable with it now, and it's something we could maybe in the right now. Laura just published a 4th book on pies, which is actually gorgeous. It's going to come out in a few months, and then both of us. I mean, we have a lot of ideas for how we want to move forward, but the problem is time. And I mean, I am talking to a couple of people in New York who've said, why don't you come, do a YouTube something, channel, or come up with some videos and stuff. It takes a lot of, for your full-time job and with other stuff, because this is a passion project. We didn't obviously do this for any financial gain at all, but we have to first pay our bills and then get into that. So at some point, for sure.
At some point. And do you think you'll move on to another book from here?
I'd love to, but not in the maybe in a few months we can start thinking about it. I'm still recovering from this one.
So yeah, but this one you've also been going around in the US and now you're here and talking about it and the publicity is still continuing for it. I mean, I don't know how planned it is, but it seems like you've done a lot from what I saw on Insta and the things that you sent me.
Yeah, we did some great. We did a lot of really nice, fun podcasts and a lot of conversation around food and gathering and not just this being a cookbook, but it being so much more than that. It's about people and culture and yeah.
And what other books has she published? Because this is
So her first book was called. She did it with her mother, and it's called Oma's Cookbook, and it's her mother's church recipes from, so it's got all the Midwestern food. Laura designed it and photographed it. Her second book is a Christmas book on cookies and desserts, which did really, really well. It's actually just now also went to Anthropology and all. That was a year before this book. Then we did this book together. And then she literally did the pie book, and so now I think she's really burnt out. So we're both going to take a bit of a break.
The big question that I have for you is, how does one find a publisher? I mean, for people, there might be an aspiring author here, but internationally, especially in the cutthroat world of publishing in New York,
right,
which is the center for the US publishing, and even globally, how do you go about looking for a publisher? What do you have to do? Like, how difficult was the process? How long did it take? What did you do to get there?
It totally depends on the genre of book that you're doing, right? So if it's something to do with a cookbook or it's something to do with self-help or, social media is a very, very big part of the book space today. There's TikTok, Book Talk, which is all about, literally people just talking about book ideas, and we have interns and we have marketing people who are scoping, and they then present all of these ideas to the editors. The whole kind of space has changed. It's the old school authors are not so happy about that because they feel like, why do we need to present ourselves if we are what we are, we have what we have. But it's also all about just putting yourself out there, your digital imprint, footprint, and putting together a really amazing proposal and finding an agent is very key, especially for one of the 5 publishing houses, or knowing somebody in the space. I feel like otherwise it's a tough kind of thing to get into. But just reaching out, you can have 100 refusals, but you'll get that one acceptance. But
how was it with the two of you for this book?
So with this book, I mean, what's interesting about it is that she had already published her Christmas book with the same publisher, Skyhorse. It's a New York-based publisher. And I'd done design work for them too, and they actually really loved the idea, and actually it was a win-win because they got this whole package. They got people who were not looking for because we designed it, we did everything. They knew it would be a beautiful piece, and they knew that they would sell it, and it's in its second print. So I think that for us.
This is in its second print?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay, I didn't know that.
So we're excited about that, and and for us it was important because they do good production. We got out the 4-color book, we got to deboss the cover, we got to, print on the paper we wanted to whatever extent we could. And we knew that this is a physical thing we can present to any other publisher and be like, hey, we did this. And for them, they're happy because they're selling books.
Living in New York, such an exciting city with every and any kind of cuisine and the best of it available, other than chaat, let's say, to you. How has that influenced your culinary journey? As a home chef, as somebody interested in cooking,
Yeah.
as somebody who's written a cookbook, how has New York over the years? I mean, you came from Karachi. It's very varied, the food in Karachi. You have Bori food,
Yes.
you have Memon food, you have Gujarati khana, you have Hyderabadi, you have Sindhi, Punjabi, KPK, you have Parsi food. So it's already a very, multifaceted cuisine in Karachi, unlike Lahore, which is basically Punjabi. So Karachi, you celebrate Diwali, you celebrate Nowruz, you have, many various holidays like that, and many different communities and cuisines. I mean, I was reading in a very specific online magazine called, I think, Atlas Obscure, I can't remember the name of it, a whole article by this young woman who'd come to Karachi, and she'd written this incredibly intellectual piece about the Hyderabadi Achar colony, the shops there, and the whole history of where the families moved from Hyderabad in India and came, and the kind of achars they make and how different they are to, let's say, other achars. So that's how varied Karachi food is. But going from basically a South Asian palate, having a South Asian palate and living in a city like that, and moving to a city like New York. So how has New York influenced you? That's what I'd like to know about in the audience.
What I love about it, and I'm sure you would agree, is that it's a melting pot. So it's people like us, it's people from all over the world. So the food is similar. There's a lot of fusion. There's all kinds of unique flavors that you wouldn't imagine that come together. And I love to explore new places. I'm always looking, and there's so much inspiration, absolutely, in every kind of cuisine. And it really is an embarrassment of riches. It really, truly is. And I'm so grateful to live there because, my mother also again keeps saying, oh, well, Houston, the food scene is really great. I'm like, it's not. New York is just, there's always something exciting and new there. And welcoming. People love new tastes and flavors, which is lovely.
Do you also shop at the markets, because they're weekend markets now in different places? Do you do all of that as well, or do you just go online and order everything?
No, absolutely. So I have a farmer's market 5 minutes away from me, and every Saturday I love to go there. And so the whole, whatever produce is there, I love to, whatever seasonal, that it usually inspires. If I'm entertaining, I'll first go and see what's available and then plan the menu around that. And then there's lots of markets around which have different spices, even within the city. And then if I want something specific, whether it's Greek or Pakistani or Indian or all of that, we have Queens and Jackson Heights and Astoria. So there's in Brooklyn, there's a lot of Middle Eastern shops where you can get, everything is available. It's very accessible, which is great.
And how would you rate the Desi food in New York?
I don't know. Well, I'm not blown away by it. There's some fusion food, which is interesting, but then everyone does the same thing,
So there's room and scope for
think
I'm wondering why it's like that.
Yeah, there's that one place that came from Delhi, Indian Table, that was really good. So, because they take their menu I tried in India too, and then I had it in New York. So I loved that. So doing these kulcha naans and all, and then everyone began to do it. I think that it just everything tastes the same for me. I don't find anything to, there's, whether it's a good biryani or a good nihari or even just high-end dining, it's not like home food to me.
No. But these recipes, I thought, were very, even though the street recipes, they seem very much like home recipes, the ones in this book.
Yes, absolutely.
I can only say it about the Pakistani food because I don't know the other cuisines as well. But I was going through them and they seem very much like a love letter to what you ate here as a child, I would say. Absolutely. It's not nouvelle in any way.
No, I'm not trying to be anything that absolutely.
It's,
it's how I remember it and how I like it, and I don't want to reinvent it because it doesn't need to be.
And Laura's baking and the things that she was doing also seem like that. Talking about Laura, you were telling me that she's now moved back to Michigan, left HarperCollins, and is working for a Christian publishing house. So tell me something, is she a Trump supporter?
The exact opposite. Her mother is a Trump supporter who watches Fox News every day, and she doesn't meet her mother anymore. She's married to a Guatemalan, so she has a half Guatemalan kid. She's very, very passionate about Trump supporters. And, her own brother passed away of COVID because I don't. For them, it's political. Even if it's a vaccine, it's political. It's not about the science behind it or any of that. It's the Midwest is like that, unfortunately. So that's one thing that's been very difficult for her. She's a New Yorker at heart like that, politically.
But she's now living in a place that's turning more towards the right.
Absolutely. But she's, you know, she lives um, like kind of in her own space. She has her own chickens and her own farm and forest and lake. And she likes to, she has like 4 dogs and cats. And she likes to live within her space. She's a bit of a recluse, actually. She doesn't like to blend, like hang out as much. The most she's met people is during this book and our promotions, you know. Otherwise, she likes to stay within her. She doesn't like to mingle as much.
And also, I think we were talking about this earlier when you and I were having a discussion, is that this book is really a kind of a book, let's say, creative director like yourself and a chef and a creative person like Laura's, kind of, I wouldn't say a political reaction, but everything is politics in some way or the other. But it's kind of a reaction or a gift to those people who don't want walls around them and don't believe that there's such a separation between people. You know, because the United States now in this political age of today, in the second Trump presidency, is moving in the opposite direction, it seems to us. When we're sitting from the outside and we're looking in, we think, my God, what is happening in the US? And this book, and this is what we were discussing, is kind of the opposite of that. You know, it's kind of a reminder of how people should be living their lives rather than, you know, thinking of how each one is different from the other and not similar. Because you've taken, there is an interesting feel to this book, that whether you go to the South American section or you go to the Pakistani section or to the Italian section or to the Brazilian section, the style of how you're showcasing that kind of cuisine is the same.
Right.
It's convivial. It's not for one single person dining at the House of Knife and Fork. You need lots of people. It brings people together. There's a word that another author of a cookbook, friend of mine, used in her cookbook called commensuality. I don't know if you've heard this word, but it's really bringing people together and continuing that conversation. So there's a lot of commensuality, I feel, in this book. And in today's political age, I feel that it's kind of, you know, it sets the conversation going in a different direction. I don't know if that's something that you thought of consciously or subconsciously, but tell us about my thoughts about the book. Or how do you feel?
I'm so glad you said this, because I think it is a huge part of our book. And for, you know, for literally, sure, we like to cook and we like to photograph, but it was very important. Like, we feel like food is universal. It's a universal, everyone loves food, everyone can gather around food. Even if you don't speak the same language, you can sit around a table and enjoy a fantastic meal. Also, you know, if you're just going to discuss, it's one thing mostly, unless you're talking about whether you want alus in your biryani, like, you don't argue about food. It unifies people, it brings people together. And that for us was a big part of this, the inclusivity of it. And that's why, you know, like, we tried to have, you know, represent as many parts of the world that we could. And again, for us, New York is such a melting pot with that. You know, everyone comes and everyone brings their own, like, we have Friendsgiving there, right? And it's everyone who has nowhere to go, and we all gather and we cook and bring foods that are from our kitchens, you know, whichever part of the world we're in, and we share it. And I think that has been you know, because it can get lonely there. You know, over here, it's so, everyone's together all the time. So there you end up with your chosen family, and that chosen family can be from any part of the world. And the universal language is food. And you literally cannot go wrong with it. No matter whether it was my degree project in college, or whether it is, you know, at the office where, you know, taking Christmas treats, whether it's, you know, going to a dhaba, like, anywhere you go, it just, yeah.
And you were telling me you've cooked a lot for your office people. And both of you did.
Absolutely.
You would do these things, right?
Of course. I mean, that was like, yeah.
Any pop-up restaurant idea you may have? You think when you go back to New York, or maybe one here with her? That would be nice for us.
It would be lovely. I really actually, it would, you know, I would love for her to come at some point and, you know, we do this. We talked about it when I was in Karachi in January, to have a little pop-up at one of the farmers markets. And again, just to Inshallah, one day we will do it.
Because the food scene here is evolving also.
100%.
I mean, you go to Karachi, especially, even in Lahore. I mean, there's so many home chefs. People are selling things on Instagram. You can buy. I mean, a friend of mine is visiting from Greece, sitting right there, and he is gluten intolerant. And I couldn't believe how many places you could get gluten-free bread. I mean, you could just order it and you could get it. And I don't know if it's good or not, Dion, the gluten-free bread here, but we can, but it's available. It's available. So you know, and that wasn't the case even 4 years ago. So things are changing so fast, and I think that the change is happening simply because of the way people are have accessibility to just talking about food itself. I mean, they're young kids. The 16-year-old kid started Smashburger here. Now it's a proper huge business, and he just started watching YouTube videos, you know, and wanted to make the perfect burger, and then made the potato bun, and there you had it. Started selling it, and then you could buy it on, I think, you could order it on from an Instagram account, and now it's so there's so many wonderful stories like that. Also, I think in Pakistan especially. Because it's still not, you know, the culinary world is not that formed. There are no societies and there are no associations like James Beard Association. There's no James Beard Award, or there's, you know, none of that. There's no Michelin is not here. Of course, then we have the unfortunate ban on alcohol over here, which I hope gets lifted one day, because you can't have, you know, wine with your food and all of that. So I think that that there's so many limitations over here, but the main thing is that that despite that, people have accessibility to information, and despite that, people are making an effort, you know, and the young kids, for example, who are trying things out. I mean, a cousin of mine bakes bread, and that's what she does. My brother has a pizza business. And learned everything, you know, while being in Pakistan. Of course, he traveled to Italy and did all of that. But he's learned really. Then the dough took him 18 months to get the Neapolitan dough. But I think it's been a form of the accessibility has given people an identity. They've created careers out of it, and that's very important in a country like Pakistan, because we don't have fantastic cooking schools like the French Culinary Institute. The accessibility of the modern age has allowed people to become, you know, create a profession out of this.
Absolutely.
In the world of food, especially, I would say.
100%.
They've obviously done it in the world of fashion. They've done it in the world of, you know, other métiers. But for food, I would say there is a kind of like a renaissance happening over here. Slow and steady, but it is happening. So I'm glad you're saying you've noticed it, because when you left compared to now, I think
100%. Like we were in Islamabad, there was like Papa Sali's and 2 restaurants. But even in Karachi, even just at the farmers market and all, there were these amazing young kids making the most amazing food. Like I was blown away. Their menu, their inspiration. And again, I think a lot has to do with the digital world. Like there's so much access, inspiration, and you know, you don't even need to travel. And sure, traveling, if you want to do that, that's amazing. But you don't, like there's, everywhere there's access, right?
I was amazed, you're talking about the Islamabad farmers market. My brother came back and he brought, there's a cheese maker there who's making camembert. I mean, that's not an easy cheese to make.
Wow.
And other French cheeses like that, and they're actually delicious.
I'm sure they are.
I mean, the people started off with making paneer, which is cottage cheese.
Right.
Then I saw, now there are many people doing mozzarella, they're doing burrata. Interesting, you know, I don't know if you know the story about mozzarella, because
I took a class making it up.
Ranjit Singh had some Italian generals working in his army, and when his empire when the British defeated him in 1846, I think this is when the Sikh Empire crumbled. He died earlier and did a lot of television. But I mean, for example, I think one of the most incredible episodes from I think is it No Reservations, but the one he travels around the world, I don't know what the title is, the one he did on Palestine, because it's a really beautiful, moving. I don't know if you must have seen it. In, you know, even today, when if you see it, it's so moving, and he was special.
I mean, there's really nobody like. I mean, literally, I would think sometimes, oh God, you know, certain people in life, and I would say if something happens to Anthony Bourdain, I don't know, I'll just like kill myself, just because it was just somebody who needed to be in this world. There was no point in him going away so soon.
It was, I still remember I was in Lisbon actually, and I was with my brother, and we were in a bookstore looking at books, and I think I was looking at a cookbook. And my brother looked at his phone, he said, Anthony Bourdain has killed himself. I was like, what?
Oh my God.
You know?
Yeah.
And it was just so odd because we were holding cookbooks, and yeah, there you have it. There you have it.
Speaking of being in the same, I remember we were together in Boston the day Princess Diana passed away.
Yeah.
If you remember this.
Yeah, yeah.
But just thinking, you know, just like memories that where you are when people, special people are, I mean, anyone, but when people go away. But yeah.
And what about your desi food? How is that? Your proper ghar ka desi, do you
I
cook
make
it?
good desi food, I will say. They're all again mother-based recipes. A lot of it is quite Hyderabadi, which is my dad. She doesn't like Hyderabadi as much. I used to cater out of my studio apartment in New York.
Oh, you used to cater like desi
Like
food.
nehari. I was just talking about this yesterday. Achar gosh, you know, like prawn biryani, tomato cut, like real masala dar stuff. And I remember my, like literally a studio apartment, so my kitchen was in my bedroom. My mom came to visit and she walked in and she looked like she'd seen a dead person or something. She just looked horrified. I'm like, is everything okay? And she's like, I just want to cry. And I said, what happened? She's like, you know, I'd walk in, I'd want my daughter's apartment to smell of flowers and candles, and it's smelling of lasan and adrak, throw everything away. And literally, that was the end of my catering career, but I did do, and I also was telling them that I was at some party and some girl was talking and she's like, oh, I need to like have food made, and you know, God, my bosses, like, people are coming and I have to have a sit down and this, that, and some other girl said, oh, this is Auntie Mumtaz who lives in Midtown, you go talk to her. I'm like, I am done. I am not spending my 30s cooking for people. So that was the
How
end.
long did that last?
I did that for like a year. And again, I think I would always give extra shrimp and I would do everything extra so nobody would say, and I would get all the organic stuff. So I think I was at a loss. I don't know what I was doing, but I just, you know, never been good in math. So.
How did you sell it to people?
Word of mouth, so I had clients that would come and pick up the food. Yeah, believe it or not.
Oh. But you've never thought of moving to the world of restaurants or anything like that?
I have. It's just, you know, again, if I was to do it like with my mother, if we were in the same city, and she often still talks about it, like, oh, let's do something, let's do like a limited menu, like 3-4 things, keep it simple, take away, not get into. It's something we've talked about and toyed about forever, but when it comes to it, you know, I freeze. I don't know, it's, you know, when you have a job and you have everything that's there and your insurance and your mortgage and, you know, like you do, it's not as easy to, you know, to set up a business in New York. Yeah, I think I'm not.
I saw a very interesting, I think, is it a Karachi kebab?
Boys.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they have started, they're these finance guys, and they have, it's actually quite delicious. They've just started. They have 3 kebab, they have 3, like there's a Bihari kebab, a chicken malai kebab, and one other kebab, and they've just started a biryani, which when I tried to order like a week before I came, because I was dying for biryani, I said, Mamu ki biryani it's called, and I was like, oh my God, this sounds legit, because their kebab rolls are great. They were like, we're so sorry, but our food truck they have, it had broken down. So they're like, for 1 week they were out, and then I came here. So I'm going to go back and try it. But they've got, like, there was a Hassan Rahim concert in East Village recently, and they were parked outside there.
The Hassan Rahim concert.
Outside. So they know where all the events are happening, where all the desis are, and that's where they park. And there's lines, and they've obviously figured it out, and it's really good. And there are 4 things, simple menu, really yummy actually.
There's a lot of, I wanted to talk to you about the new Desi scene. There's a New Yorker friend of mine sitting right in the front row also. So the new Desi scene, because there's singers like Ali Sethi and Arooj Aftab, there's interesting artists, there's chef, restaurateurs doing pop-ups in small restaurants like these people. And how is, I don't know if you're involved at all in the Desi scene in New York, but how is that evolving? Because it seems like it is.
It absolutely is, and there's another friend of ours, my Sipte, who started BK Jani.
Oh yes, I've heard of
You
that.
know, and he's amazing because he was in film, And I got to meet him because he was doing his thesis. He said, I want to follow a Pakistani, somebody who's just come from there, and I want to follow their journey and just kind of see what a day in the life of, and so that's how we got met, and it was his thesis project. He got, into it. And then he said, I'm so done with all of this film and editing and all of that. He would make the most amazing burgers, barbecuing outside in his house, and then launch this restaurant out of the blue. It had, again, 4 items. Like the Jani burger and 3 others. And 2 months into it, it was like, there wasn't enough people. It was in Bushwick. So the foot traffic there wasn't amazing. And he was like thinking, I think I'm going to give up. After trying a few other things, I'm going to give up because it's not working out. And, I just think that he called up his realtor and he's like, I'm going to give the space back to you. I don't think I can manage this. And I think literally the next day, he had been written up in the New York Times.
Really?
And there was a line outside the door. And it was like the most amazing story. And now he has 3 locations. And so his main, in a larger space in Bushwick, there's one other smaller one in downtown Brooklyn and one in the city. And, he's very particular. He was like the soup Nazi, like no ketchup for you, like you cannot use a knife and fork, you cannot eat it a certain way, there's no utensils, there's no nothing. And he's very particular, like you cannot have your burger well done. But it's fantastic. It's really delicious.
It's a desi burger?
So he has 4 versions. There's one called Ye Cheese, which has cheese, and there's a Lahori one, there's a Brooklyn. But it's all fantastic meat, and then there are different spices and chutneys. So he's just got the burger patty perfect, the bun perfect. Everything is, and he's just launched, Abhi, I think a short rib, like I think a few days ago. He also has a Nihari sandwich. But people love him, and a lot of the friends in the finance space have been like, they want to invest, and but he's very particular about how he wants to do it, and he's doing it that way, and that's been a big inspiration. He's told me, "Ki mere saath join kar lo, but just give up 2 years of your life." I'm like, I think that's too much. I can't. But
So you still have to take the leap.
yeah, exactly.
Well, on that note, thank you for being here, and thank you, Mumtaz.
Thank you, Jalal. I'm so happy it was you because I was very nervous. Thank you, guys.
Here's a book, guys.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was great to be in this space.
That was good.